Australian history contains a remarkable and often overlooked fact. The entire colonization project nearly collapsed at the very beginning. This is not an exaggeration. By late 1788, the members of the First Fleet were facing starvation. The soil at Sydney Cove proved extremely poor for farming, crops repeatedly failed, and supply ships expected from England had not arrived, leaving the colony dangerously short of food. Governor Arthur Phillip understood the severity of the situation. If nothing changed, the colony would not survive. Determined to find a solution, he boarded a boat and traveled up the harbor until he discovered a creek. Following it inland, he eventually encountered something that would transform the future of the colony and ultimately help save Australia. The settlement that emerged from that discovery was established less than 10 months after the First Fleet had first arrived. Remarkably, it still exists today and continues to function as a living community. Visitors can walk its streets even now. What is rarely discussed, however, is that this settlement is only one of 12 towns founded before Australia was even officially called Australia that have remained continuously inhabited ever since. These places are not static museum exhibits. They are active towns where history never paused. Pubs that opened more than 2 centuries ago continue to serve drinks. Bridges originally constructed by convicts still carry modern traffic. Descendants of the earliest settlers live near graves dating back to the 1790s. Yet behind the heritage lies a more complicated truth. The land that helped the colonists survive had already been home to indigenous peoples for roughly 60,000 years. The elegant Georgian structures that tourists admire today were often constructed by men and women forced to labor in chains. The heritage celebrated in modern Australia grew out of displacement, hardship, and convict labor. With that reality in mind, the following ranking explores the 12 oldest continuously inhabited European settlements in Australia, arranged from the youngest to the oldest. At number 12 is Campbelltown in Tasmania. Founded in 1826, the town now has a population of about 823 residents. Originally developed as a military garrison, Campbelltown served a practical purpose, protecting the crucial road linking Hobart and Launceston at a time when the route was notorious for bushrangers. What truly distinguishes the town, however, is the Red Bridge, constructed between 1836 and 1838 using an astonishing 1.25 million bricks produced by convict labor. One aspect of the bridge's construction continues to amaze historians and engineers alike. It was initially built on dry land. Convicts handmade each brick from local clay and carefully placed them to form a magnificent arch structure. Once the bridge was complete, engineers redirected the entire Elizabeth River so it flowed underneath it. In other words, during the 1830s, a river was moved in order to accommodate the bridge. A heritage guide who has worked in the region for 15 years explained that visitors frequently underestimate the magnitude of this achievement. Over 1.25 million individual bricks were crafted by hand and assembled with such precision that modern engineers still admire the work today. The bridge has survived far longer than many newer concrete structures, demonstrating that convict craftsmanship could surpass numerous modern techniques. However, Campbelltown faces its own challenges. The same highway bypass that helped preserve its historical appearance also removed much of its passing traffic, leaving the town quieter than before. With the population hovering around 800 residents, it is undeniably small. Yet for anyone interested in crossing a bridge that was built on dry land before a river was redirected beneath it, Campbelltown remains the only place in Australia where that extraordinary feat can be experienced. Number 11 is Oatlands, also located in Tasmania. Established in 1821, it currently has fewer than 600 residents. Despite its modest size, the town contains more than 150 colonial sandstone buildings, representing the largest collection of quarried sandstone houses in Australia within a settlement of such a small population. The most striking landmark is Callington Mill, a carefully restored windmill that has operated since 1837. It holds the distinction of being the only functioning Lincolnshire-style windmill in the entire Southern Hemisphere. Built with convict labor, the structure originally ground grain for the local population. Today, it continues producing flour commercially while also housing a whiskey distillery. The same stones and mechanisms that once supported colonial survival now contribute to the production of premium spirits. Another historic structure in Oatlands is the courthouse, constructed in 1829. This building is not only the oldest structure in the town, but also the oldest surviving rural Supreme Court courthouse in Australia. Nearby stood a jail that contained a water-powered flour mill where convicts were required to grind grain during their imprisonment. Much of what exists in Oatlands today was constructed by people in chains, and remarkably, most of it still stands. There is a certain irony in how the town's heritage was preserved. When a highway bypass diverted traffic away from Oatlands, many feared economic decline. Yet the absence of through traffic also removed development pressure. Without developers seeking to modernize the area, demolitions never occurred. In an unexpected twist, the progress that seemed likely to destroy Oatlands actually protected it. Number 10 is Richmond in Tasmania, a village founded during the 1820s that now has approximately 880 residents. Despite its size, Richmond holds an extraordinary concentration of historical landmarks. It contains Australia's oldest stone bridge still carrying traffic, the country's oldest intact convict jail, and both the oldest Catholic and Anglican churches in Australia. Richmond Bridge, constructed between 1823 and 1825 by convict labor, remains operational nearly 2 centuries later. Local legend claims the bridge is haunted by George Grover, an infamous flogger responsible for whipping convicts. According to the story, convicts murdered Grover in 1832 and threw his body into the river from the bridge. Whether entirely factual or partially embellished, the tale reflects the brutal realities of convict-era Tasmania. The Richmond jail once imprisoned Isaac "Icky" Solomon, a criminal widely believed to have inspired the character Fagin in Charles Dickens' novel Oliver Twist. If the connection is accurate, a Tasmanian convict helped inspire one of literature's most famous villains. Today, the same jail where Solomon was held has become a popular tourist attraction. Richmond has fully embraced heritage tourism, which means the village can sometimes feel crowded with visitors. Nevertheless, the historical authenticity remains intact. The bridge still carries vehicles, churches continue holding services, and the town's heritage is not a replica, but a living continuation of the past. Number 9 is Albany in Western Australia. Founded on December 26, 1826, Albany now has a population of roughly 35,000 people. Its origin story is almost humorous. British authorities believed the French were preparing to establish a colony in Western Australia. In response, Major Edmund Lockyer departed Sydney in November 1826 with 21 soldiers and 23 convicts aboard the brig Amity. His mission was simple: claim the region before France could. Lockyer arrived on Christmas Day in 1826 and formally claimed the territory the following day. Ironically, historians have found little evidence that France actually intended to colonize the area. In essence, Britain claimed a large portion of the continent based on rumors and fear. Despite this paranoid beginning, Albany grew into a significant settlement. Patrick Taylor Cottage, built in 1832 by a ticket-of-leave convict, stands as the oldest surviving dwelling in Western Australia. Nearby, Strawberry Hill Farm, established in 1827, served as the colony's first government farm. Albany also played an important role in military history. In November 1914, more than 30,000 Australian and New Zealand soldiers gathered in King George Sound before departing for World War I. For many Anzac troops, Albany represented the final piece of Australian soil they would ever see. The town also hosted Australia's last operating whaling station, which continued functioning until 1978. Today, the site has been transformed into a whale-watching museum. Although Albany lies 418 kilometers from Perth, making it relatively remote, its blend of improbable founding history and genuine historical importance gives it a unique character among Australian cities. Number 8 is Richmond in New South Wales, founded on December 6, 1810, with a present-day population of around 6,500 residents. This settlement was one of 5 Macquarie towns, communities deliberately placed on higher ground to avoid the devastating floods of the Hawkesbury River. Governor Lachlan Macquarie understood that the fertile valley offered excellent farmland, but that settlers repeatedly lost their lives during catastrophic flooding. To address the problem, Macquarie established permanent townships on elevated land. On December 6, 1810, he officially named 5 towns: Windsor, Richmond, Pitt Town, Wilberforce, and Castlereagh, and celebrated the occasion with a toast for each one. Richmond's founding story is particularly interesting because of James Meehan, the surveyor responsible for planning the town. Meehan was an Irish convict transported for participating in the 1798 Irish Rebellion against British rule. Ironically, a man who had fought against the British Empire ended up designing towns that helped expand it. Rising through the ranks, Meehan eventually became Deputy Surveyor General, representing one of the most remarkable career transformations in colonial history. Today, Richmond has largely been absorbed into Sydney's expanding suburbs, and the Royal Australian Air Force Base Richmond dominates its northern edge. Yet Richmond Park, established in 1811 as one of Australia's earliest public parks, still forms the heart of the historic centre, and Meehan's original street layout continues to define the modern town. Ross, Tasmania, founded in 1812 as a military garrison and officially named in 1821, ranks next with a population of roughly 300 residents. Despite its small size, the village contains what historians consider one of the greatest artistic achievements of early colonial Australia. At the center of this story stands Ross Bridge. Ross Bridge features 186 intricately carved sandstone panels created by Daniel Herbert, a convict who had originally been sentenced to death for highway robbery before his punishment was commuted to transportation for life. Assigned to work on the bridge, Herbert spent 56 weeks carving designs that included Celtic motifs, animals, portraits of colonial officials, and even subtle political commentary. His remarkable craftsmanship ultimately earned him a free pardon. Among the carvings are faces representing real historical figures, including Lieutenant Governor George Arthur and the exiled King of Iceland, Jorgen Jorgensen. One carving shows a lion devouring a lamb, which some historians interpret as criticism of imperial power. Another curious detail involves incorrect mile markers on the bridge. Hobart is listed as 69 miles away when the real distance is 74. It remains uncertain whether Herbert received inaccurate instructions or intentionally carved the wrong number as a quiet act of rebellion. Ross also housed the Ross Female Factory, where more than 12,000 female convicts passed between 1847 and 1854. The ruins remain today. The village crossroads gained the nickname Temptation, Salvation, Recreation, and Damnation, referencing the nearby pub, church, town hall, and jail. Herbert himself designed and carved his own tombstone, which overlooks the bridge that ultimately secured his freedom. At number 6 is Windsor in New South Wales. Settled in 1791 and officially named on December 6, 1810, the town itself now has roughly 2,500 residents. Windsor claims to be the oldest town in Australia, a title also claimed by Georgetown in Tasmania, although neither location can prove the claim conclusively. Windsor's historical significance centers on Thomson Square, widely regarded as the oldest public square on mainland Australia. Interestingly, it was not named after a British aristocrat, but after Andrew Thomson, a convict transported in 1792 for stealing cloth. Thomson transformed his life after arriving in the colony, becoming a prosperous farmer and trader. During devastating floods in 1806 and 1809, Thomson repeatedly risked his life rescuing settlers trapped by rising waters. Using boats, he saved families stranded on rooftops and trees. Governor Macquarie described him as a worthy, upright, and meritorious man, and appointed him magistrate, coroner, and constable, extraordinary positions for a former convict. When Thomson died in 1810, Macquarie honored him by naming the square after him. The Macquarie Arms Hotel, serving drinks since 1815, is the oldest surviving hotel building in Australia still operating as a hotel. Nearby stands St. Matthew's Anglican Church, designed by Francis Greenway, an architect transported for forgery in 1814. Greenway later became the colony's civil architect, and his portrait even appeared on the Australian $10 note between 1966 and 1993. A local historian who has studied Windsor's heritage for 3 decades explained that the town continually battles development proposals threatening Thomson Square. The same heritage that gives Windsor its significance also attracts developers seeking to build over it. Nevertheless, the square endures, the Macquarie Arms still serves drinks, and St. Matthew's continues holding services, preserving a powerful example of the convict story's redemptive possibilities. Number 5 is Bathurst in New South Wales, founded on May 7, 1815, with a modern population of about 44,621. Bathurst holds the distinction of being Australia's oldest inland European settlement and the first town established west of the Blue Mountains. For 25 years, the Blue Mountains had blocked westward expansion, trapping the colony within a narrow coastal strip. In 1813, explorers Blaxland, Wentworth, and Lawson finally discovered a viable route across the mountains by traveling along ridgelines rather than valleys. Governor Macquarie quickly ordered a road built. William Cox supervised the project with 30 convicts and 8 guards. Using only hand tools, they constructed 160 kilometers of road and 12 bridges through rugged mountain terrain in just 6 months between 1814 and 1815. The achievement continues to impress modern engineers. Cox received a grant of 2,000 acres for his work. The convicts received nothing. Macquarie personally crossed the road in April and May of 1815. On May 7th, he officially founded Bathurst. In his journal, he wrote of the vast plains and distant mountains, describing both admiration and a sense of melancholy in the solitude of the landscape. What he did not mention was that the Wiradjuri people had lived on those plains for thousands of years. European expansion triggered violent conflict. In 1824, Governor Brisbane declared martial law in the region, allowing settlers to shoot Aboriginal people on sight. The Bathurst War became one of the most brutal episodes in Australian frontier history. Wiradjuri leader Windradyne eventually negotiated peace and received a formal pardon before his death in 1829. By the 1828 census, roughly 73% of Bathurst's population consisted of convicts. The town later transformed dramatically after gold was discovered at Ophir in 1851, launching Australia's first gold rush. Today, Bathurst is internationally known for Mount Panorama and the Bathurst 1000 motor race, roads built by convicts now hosting the nation's most famous car race. The story continues with several more settlements, ultimately leading to the oldest surviving community, Parramatta in New South Wales, founded on November 2, 1788. Established less than 10 months after the first fleet arrived, Parramatta became the agricultural lifeline that allowed the struggling colony to survive. Fertile soil along the Parramatta River enabled successful harvests that supplied food to Sydney, proving that the new colony could sustain itself. Convict farmer James Roos conducted the colony's first successful private farming experiment there, demonstrating that convicts could become productive settlers. Elizabeth Farm, built by John and Elizabeth MacArthur in 1793, remains the oldest surviving European dwelling in Australia. Meanwhile, Old Government House, constructed between 1799 and 1816, stands as the oldest surviving public building in the country and is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Yet Parramatta's story also includes resistance. Pimilwy, a Bidjigal warrior, led armed opposition against colonization during the 1790s. After surviving multiple gunshot wounds and escaping captivity, he became legendary among Aboriginal communities before finally being killed in 1802. His story reflects the fierce resistance Indigenous Australians mounted against colonial expansion. Today, Parramatta has evolved into Sydney's second central business district, home to more than 2 million people in the greater region. Unlike many historic towns that faded over time, Parramatta's importance has never diminished. The settlement that once saved a starving colony now stands as a thriving modern city. These 12 towns represent living chapters of Australian history. Founded during a time when survival was uncertain and starvation loomed, they were built largely by convicts forced to labor under harsh conditions. Designed by individuals sometimes sentenced to death and shaped by both resilience and conflict, they have endured floods, violence, isolation, abandonment, and the slow passage of time. Yet despite everything, they remain standing today. Visitors can walk their streets, cross bridges built 2 centuries ago, and see the places where the foundations of modern Australia were laid. Some were built on dry land before a river was diverted beneath them. Others served as brutal penal colonies where death seemed preferable to life. Still others became the canvas for a condemned man whose carvings earned him freedom. Together, these settlements reveal how complex and extraordinary Australia's early colonial history truly is, a story of survival, ingenuity, injustice, and endurance that continues to shape the nation today.